message. We have to keep learning because we're all learning a lot this morning. On your programs, you see a round table and a plenary, and I'm going to put those two things together so that everybody will sort of we'll go straight into a plenary, essentially, but Christopher and Adrian are going to come up, and Miguel, we can carry on from where we were talking a little bit earlier on. And so Adrian, Christopher, Miguel, everybody knows everybody. And I guess I have a first question, because one of the things I've been learning this morning is really that it's a bunch of trade-offs. We seem to be struggling, and every time we advance in one direction, it costs us something else. But maybe one of you want to take on that, certainly in terms of water. Christopher, do you want to jump in on?
Yeah, I think it's about balance, actually, rather than trade-offs.
Balance, okay.
I think that's more the thing. And I'll tell you a little story. I was working for the UK government on integrated pest management, and we were doing a consultation with farmers. And I was sitting in a meeting, and a farmer said to me, "It doesn't work, load of rubbish. I've tried it, I've done the insect hotels, I've got the predators, I've bought the ladybirds, I've done everything, doesn't work." I said, "Well, what was your pest problem?" "I didn't have any pests, that's why I did it." I said, "Well, if there's no pests, what are your predators going to eat?" And it's about balance. You can't have predators without pests. And what you do is you have the predators to keep the pests under control, and you manage, and it's thinking through nature-based solutions. You know, before we got involved, plants grew perfectly well. And how did nature manage? Well, I think that's part of the puzzle, really.
How did nature manage?
That's my take on it.
Adrian?
I will say momentum. Momentum, that's what I think is interesting right now. So there is a clear awareness that we need to do something, and we anticipate everything that is going to happen if we don't do anything. There is readiness on the technology, so there are many tools that are available now that were not before, and there are experience as well. So there are early adopters, people who is testing, trying, experimenting, and at the end of the day, this is a group exercise. This is what is important. There's not going to be a single leader changing everything. It has to be a group, societal, or market effort.
In my case, it's about resources, it's about technology, and it's about conscience. And I want to, so in one of my previous lives, for many years, and I'm still involved at the board level and at the shareholder level, I used to grow a lot of vegetables, like 800 million pounds of vegetables per year all over the world. And it's very interesting. You were talking about Murcia. We have a factory in Murcia. And when you talk to farmers in Murcia, they are really conscious about the use of water. If you talk with the farmers in La Rioja, they really don't care, especially the ones closer to the mountains, because they've never been challenged by the lack of water. The second is knowledge and technology. So, for example, Murcia is a very good example of, you know, all the new technologies have been tried, I would say, in that southeast part of Spain successfully, and that allows to be more efficient. And number three is conscious. I mean, understanding that you might have that water, but if you don't use it properly, your neighbor might not have that water. And that is a big part of education, which in the end is a big part of our job that we need to do with farmers and also with companies and people in general.
So you're making me think of a story I wrote in December 2019 out of the Navajo Nation about people who live without running water. There are something like 2 million Americans who don't have the indoor plumbing, which was an incredible number to me. And I went to visit some people, and one of the striking things was that within one generation, these people had goats and sheep and had grown crops from seeps, sort of springs that would come up in the morning, and those seeps had all dried up, and now they had no ability to grow crops on the land around their property. And the water that was there much of it was polluted as well, that were in the groundwater. So things are changing so very rapidly in parts of the world.
Absolutely, because we are eating much more, and we are many more eating.
Right.
So that is number one.
Right.
And then another thing and this is interesting, because of the market, and that's why I was talking about consciousness. When you go to a supermarket, I was talking about that yesterday, and it has a lot to do with the waste that we were talking before. People just want this size of apples, or this size of broccoli, or this size of eggplants. The rest, you don't want it. And the retailers will not buy it. So sometimes there's a secondary market where they do that. Some other times they just drop it out there. But you've spent all the resources of water, the fuel, the fertilizers, everything to do something that is total waste. So I think that is a multiplier effect combined with the number of people and the amount of food we eat today versus 50 years ago.
But one resource we haven't talked about is carbon. So the organic matter in the soil, which we know will retain moisture much more effectively than just about anything else. And also is important when we talk about trade-offs in terms of the quality of the food, not just the quantity of the food.
Right.
You just mustn't lose sight. I mean, a lot of what we've heard, which I think is absolutely amazing, I've learned a huge amount, but it's always been focused around quantity, quantity, quantity. And we've got to get back to mixing that with quality. And part of that answer is organic matter.
So we're seeing diseases that we had thought of as Western, like type 2 diabetes, now showing up in the developing world because of that, partly, right? We're giving people calories, but not good calories.
Yeah, and some of it is speed of growth. I mean, if you're a farmer, you also want your crops to grow as fast as possible, particularly in vegetable production. But you are going to lose nutrient density with very fast growing. I mean, just take lettuces. You buy a lettuce from the supermarket, it will wilt within 2 or 3 days. And the lettuce you grow yourself in your garden will not. And that is a sign of the nutrient density of that product.
Right. I really do want to open this up, and Scott, you have a question right away. And if I miss, please shout or throw things if you feel you're not being seen, because we're looking into bright lights.
Miguel, I was very impressed by what you showed us, well, everything, but what the 100 acres in New Mexico. But I'm not clear on what was necessary to provide the water there.
That's a very good question, and it has a very easy answer. I mentioned that before, but maybe I didn't make it as clear as that. And this is something that it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. That's why I was talking about finding crops that can use resources that otherwise would not be utilized. So we need to optimize the use of the scarce resources, but also in order to get to 10 billion people, we need to use resources that otherwise. Most deserts in the planet, maybe 90% of them, are extremely full of water. At a very low depth, like in that desert in New Mexico, I think we are getting water at 90 meters, and in some places even at 45 meters. And it's one of the biggest aquifers in the United States. It's an ancient ocean, and we also have another farm in Texas. So what is the challenge with that water? It is salty water. So the way you just create a well, and you just get the water out of it. Again, you are not bringing salt water from the sea. Many people say you bring trucks, and I say, no, those deserts are completely full of water. You just need to get it up and use it wisely, right?
And correct me if I'm wrong, but much of New Orleans and other areas now has brackish water moving up into the country, I think, right? There's a lot more brackish water appearing.
Yes, and because the aquifers in the end, we are deploying some of the other aquifers, and because there's water, those aquifers are moving to fill the gaps of other places.
Right.
We have you bring it up from whatever the depths was, and then you treat it.
Yeah, no, we don't treat it. It is extremely clean water. It's been there for hundreds of thousands of years. So it's the most purified water ever.
Wow.
Super clean. We do, I mean, metal, we test heavy metals, we test, there's no pesticides, there's no been crops there for hundreds of years. And so there's no heavy metals, no pesticides, no nothing, super clean. Just high minerality, high salinity, which is great for a sea plant. Like this algae is perfect for us, right?
So you just dig a well and that provides?
Yeah, that's it. And then, by the way, even when it's not used, we reuse 98% of it.
I've got two questions
if I may,
down there.
If I may add here, I don't know, an example that we have, because there are other alternatives. For instance, we work with a company in Peru, in the Nazca Desert, And their idea was to recover the desert and turn it into arable soil. And they estimate that they have to invest around $15,000 during 3 years. And after 5 years, they were able to have trees that were growing, and the way they were getting the water was through the air. They were condensating the water with a device that they designed, and it was enough. The water that they were getting through the air to irrigate, and, well, of course, cover crops, some citrus, those were the crops that they were growing, and they are successfully implementing that. And by the way, the main driver of creating a system in the soil that could maintain and support the plants was to increase the organic matter in the soil, in this case, adding a compost done by chicken residues.
Actually, in New Mexico, there's also sites which have employed that technique by boosting the organic matter and inoculating that organic matter with a specific profile of microbiology, and plants will grow, and then they will create their own moisture.
Yeah, I want to jump to the cost quality that you mentioned before, and bring this concept of true accounting, the true cost accounting, because we take food for granted. We, as consumers, want food to be nutritious, convenient, delicious, and cheap. And this forces the industry to work with tiny, skinny margins, choosing non-quality ingredients, and not creating this nutritious, delicious, and whole food variety and offering. So why is it that we are not educating properly consumers to not to take food for granted and understand the value of food, the real cost of food?
I would say there is first a problem with the food supply system. So, but we're not going to go deeper on this because this is, there could be many opinions. But for sure, if we work a little bit on gaining efficiency on how the money flows into the food supply system, probably we'll be able to decrease the cost and make food more affordable. And then conductual behavior, so how the consumers pick the food, that's extremely important. Here, it was so interesting to listen to banana growers in Colombia. They were obsessed on how to produce bananas that were perfect, let's say, from the shape, shiny, and so on. So they were spraying 52 times in the year. So every week, they were throwing insecticide, because in the moment you have an insect in the banana, then it is going to have that spot. I explained them an experience that we had in Spain with the Plátano de Canarias, that is the producing area of banana here in Spain. They make this commercial campaign to show that having a spot is a level of quality, it's a sign of quality. So people were willing to buy those or even pay more instead of the shiny, perfect bananas coming from Ecuador, Honduras, or Colombia. They were surprised, they didn't know that. So we can educate the consumers, and we should educate the consumers, and we as consumers should evolve the way we do it.
I think of tomatoes in the United States, so everything had to be a perfectly round tomato, and now ugly tomatoes, which are, heritage tomatoes are fashionable and more expensive, or you go from people only wanting white eggs because brown eggs look dirty, and now brown eggs are organic and fashionable again. And obviously, we can train people. I think there was a question down here that I missed.
Sorry.
Not?
No.
No?
Yeah.
Over here. Sorry. Go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, my question is for Miguel. So thank you very much for the good presentation for the three. Miguel, it's very impressive what you're doing. So I think for these novel biomasses, we need success cases like this. So I have a couple of questions. The first one is about water footprint or virtual water that you mentioned. Are you using this indicator as a way to improve in a daily basis? And are you considering other indicators, sustainable indicators like energy use or carbon footprint to complete the entire sustainability approach? And the second one is related with the uses of the microalgae biomass. So, of course, food is in your roadmap, and I was wondering if you're considering other non-food application for the microalgae biomass in order to make it feasible.
So this is important. Two things. One, I've been in the farming world for 27 years. First for, 20 years on the conventional food, 7 years with the algae. I left the everyday of the algae business in July this year, and now we are doing different applications. To answer your question, what we were doing and what they are doing in IWI is getting supplements, which is number one. Number two, getting proteins. In the end, you can eat that. The biomass can be used for several things. One, biofuels. In my opinion, biofuels is not a viable way to use either. I mean, it's not economically viable. And many people have tried to do that. Like that farm that you've seen in New Mexico is a farm that was built to produce biofuels, and they went bankrupt because economically speaking, it was not possible to do that. So I think food applications are, you can make money and you can be profitable, then supplements. And then one thing that is not being used yet at a massive scale, but some partners that we had were using it, was to feed cows. Number one, you can use it to feed as a feedstock, but most importantly, you can change the ratio of omega-3, omega-6, and omega-9 in those omega-3, omega-3, and omega-6 in the cows, making cows to be healthier, to have more calves. So the applications, as a summary, you can do biofuels, you can do supplements, you can do feedstock. But one thing that you were talking before is about health, and that is something that really we don't talk about health when we talk about this kind of crops. And I forgot to mention that when I was talking about sustainability. We also need to think about food. We are what we eat, and start introducing this kind of crops is, in my opinion, one of the solutions for the problem we have, both to feed those cattle and become much more productive, and also for us to be healthier and to eat better. So the applications are endless. Just another one, they are taking that algae to produce plastics. They are taking that algae to produce ink, to produce many, clothes, right? People like Ecolab, and it is amazing what they do.
We have another question down here.
Yes, it's a question also for Miguel. How do you think the model is already scalable? And if not, what are the key factors to be worked on to make this scalable?
That's a good question. So what we've proven is that the model is scalable. There's many people that has been growing algae. Well, by the way, there's big algae production farms in Australia, in China, normally in India, also in the west of the United States. They are growing normally freshwater algae in order to produce inks or to produce color for textiles or to produce spirulina, which is just to get proteins. This project was very interesting to us, first of all, because it was the biggest microalgae farm, number one. Number two, it was the biggest for sure in the world with salt water. And to me, it is, well, we prove that it's scalable. We have 100 acres we had 100 acres in New Mexico and then 50 acres in Texas. But the question is, when you don't have food, when you don't have nutrients, when you are in the desert in the UAE or in Israel or whatever, it's not just about the cost, it's about having food. And this is one of the things we are going to face. So the answer is, yes, it's scalable. Of course, you need a certain economies of scale in order to make it profitable. But now the technology is out there, and it can be, and you will see more algae farms in the world in the next 5 years.
I also think we can ask questions across the table. I know Julie, for example, was saying earlier on she hadn't been able to ask some questions from some earlier sessions, so feel free to open up to some of the questions you have. Sheila.
I had a follow-on question, because I'm struck by the use of the word consciousness that you used, Miguel. And I appreciate all of the uses to grow more quality food, but it seems to me that we can have an increased foundation from this multiplier effect that you talk about, from consciousness, from the consumer, from the end user. So I think we need to approach this, and I'm a layman, so I have no idea about all of this, but I think we need to approach this from both sides of the spectrum. And so I still remain curious as to what is being done to increase the urgency and the multiplier effect of the consciousness and to minimize the food waste, because that will give you a significant platform to use to close the gap. And anyone can speak to this, but I really have questions around that.
I'm going to use very quickly. I think I told you I have a night job, which is I'm on the board of a Houston food bank. And we provide about between 400 and 600,000 meals per day. So last year we provided in the Houston area 151 million meals. And I want to use this because, and yesterday I think I mentioned briefly, one of the initiatives we have is talking with farmers all over the United States, and those products that they are not going to be harvesting to be sold in supermarkets, to be able for us to pay the labor to harvest them, pay the transportation and bring it. That would decrease significantly the waste, and there will be millions of people, happy to eat that. Related to the consciousness, and one thing we are doing in the food bank, coming as an example, our main goal is to feed people, of course, but also education is one of our pillars. And one of the things we are doing is bringing healthy food. So 85% of the meals we provide contains fruits or vegetables. And so it's something that we are educating people to eat better. The final thing about consciousness is we have a challenge. If you ask in the United States to every consumer who would buy a free-range chicken that just eats vegetables and is being not in cages, 99% of the people would say they would buy that. If you go to the market, 99% of the people would buy conventional one because it's 1/3 the cost of the other one. So we have to face reality, and with this crisis, people have a very small wallet to feed their families. And yes, they can be conscious and everybody wants to do better, but in the end you have to face reality. So it's not going to be easy. We are really trying to be advocates for that, but we are also facing reality, and that is something that is going to take that's why it needs to be a balance between good tomatoes, which I miss them a lot when I'm in the States, and also cost-efficient ones.
But
I'd be worth adding, I think it's sticks and carrots as well. I mean, one of the places I'm growing a lot of vegetables is in France, and public procurement plays a big role in the stick bit of that. So now in France, public bodies have to procure 50% of the food that they provide from organic farms. And of course that trickles into schools, into hospitals, and into canteens in public spaces. Supermarkets now have to buy 10% of their fresh produce from local producers, which engages the local community and develops livelihoods in rural areas. And bit by bit, this does work. It does raise the level of consciousness, but you are working in a food-obsessed nation to start with. You go to the UK, and you have the same paradox over the chickens that you see in the United States. Everybody would love to have a 3-year-old, free-range chicken running around the place instead of a 6-week-old beast that they bought in the supermarket. But actually, in practice, budgets are tight. People don't have the means. But it is this balance, and I think certainly in the UK, we could do much more with public procurement than we're doing.
I have a question. Oh, Julie, go ahead.
Thank you, yes. So following this discussion around food waste, I agree with Christopher also that we should be promoting local production and local consumption to reduce distances. But this is a little bit utopic, right? We live in a global world, and there's commodities that are being produced worldwide and consumed by very specific major consumers. And I can see how companies are like crazy to better understand their supply chains and what will happen at at the long term in terms of the resiliency of their supply chains and whether they will be able to keep sourcing from one specific region their key commodity, and they want to know where they will have to switch the sourcing in the next few years. And in that way, I was wondering, Adrian, how your data, the data you are gathering in terms of soil fertility, and maybe you have some indicators also around what are the crops that are most suitable to different kinds of soils in different kinds of regions, how this can inform strategies that help us construct food systems that reduce the waste and also give these kind of insights to the companies wanting to know where they are going to source in the future when climate change will disrupt everything where they do have their operations now.
Very interesting question, because 10 ago we did this experiment. Is our technology able to provide those kind of insights? The answer was yes. And then second question, is the market interested in that? So we went to farmers and told them, hey, if I tell you what crop suits the best in this field, in this soil, will you plant it? And they were like, sure, yeah, we'll do it. But at the end of the day, they didn't, because market was leading their decisions. So we were like, why you didn't do this and you did the other thing? And they were like, I knew I was going to sell the whole crop, the whole harvest, faster and better with this crop. Okay, so which kind of crop we put in the field is not based on biological disease or parameters. So that was the first learning we had. So while technology can give some insights, reality is that the market constraints are going to be big enough.
Maybe these insights are more informative for retailers and brands who are kind of defining these strategies about where they are going to source next and where they are going to provoke the demand of these crops. So they are trying to figure out this.
There is another dimension
to drive the demand.
That is very interesting. Well, first, differentiation, the commoditization of the crops is essential. We have to differentiate local wheat from wheat coming from the other side of the planet. So they cannot compete at the same level because there are some additional costs that are not integrated in the final cost of the crop, which at the end of the day, who is assuming the cost? The planet, no? That's the reason, because everything is happening as it is happening. But what is very interesting is, can we adapt or evolve or use all the technologies that are available to adapt the soil and make it productive for the crop we want to grow there? Yes. The question is yes. Also, the answer is yes. There are plenty of tools that we can relay, genetics, biotech, and others.
Can I say one thing, which is, in my opinion, a very essential matter on this, because I've been doing that all my life. But I think we need to question ourselves. Do we really need to eat strawberries 365 days a year?
Consumer
do
behavior.
we really need to eat tomato 365 days a year?
Yeah.
So the answer is no. And the answer is that we cannot produce all fruits and vegetables locally everywhere. Because I think that's craziness, and that will take us to extinction, because it's forcing nature, is using crazy resources to grow things that should not grow. So it's funny, we talk about our kids being with the iPad, and this generation, they see something and they want it, but we have to look ourselves in the mirror. And you want to eat raspberries every day. I said, well, that's nonsense, right? So in Spain, and I was with my parents, and I was talking about my grandmother this weekend, and it's funny, still in Navarra, you eat the seasonal vegetables and the legumes, and that to me is fascinating. It's amazing. So I think we need to start being conscious that if we want to feed all those people, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will be able to eat exactly whatever you want the moment you want. We need to start educating people to go to seasonalities, and if not, pay the price.
Pay the price.
Yeah, and part of that, I think, is about on-farm waste. I mean, I'm just thinking of a polytunnel full of tomatoes I looked at in August, and they should have sold about £20,000 worth of tomatoes. They ended up selling 6, which means that £14,000 of tomatoes fell on the ground and rotted. If they had been able to make a nice local passata, they could have processed them. Now, the reason why they couldn't sell those tomatoes is they were the wrong shape. It was nothing to do with what they tasted of, nothing to do with their nutritional quality. They were perfectly good food, but they were the wrong shape.
Absolutely.
I would love to have a last question, and it really does get back to education, and it relates to something that my colleagues have been writing about, which is school foods. And this year in America, children in many schools have been given Lunchables, and anybody who knows Lunchables are packets produced of little strange crackers and round things that almost look like a piece of turkey, but it could have fooled me, and square pieces of cheese, and that's considered a school meal, and they're packaged and go around. And then we did a comparative look at school meals around the world, and in Portugal, kids tend to get a bean-based vegetable soup, and Spain's an awful lot healthier. But it seems to me that a lot of what we're talking about is teaching people how to cook and eat seasonally and enjoy the right foods at the right time. And how do we incentivize that at a school level? I mean,
well, in France, going back to France,
again,
the schools have to publish their menus in the local newspaper. So it's completely transparent what they're actually feeding the local kids, and they get a lot of comments on menus.
And people care.
People engage. Yeah, people care. I mean, it's amazing. If you going back to the surveys that you were talking about, chickens and so on. I mean, I saw a survey in the UK where a bottle of Coca-Cola and a packet of crisps, does that equal a meal? What percent of the people said a packet of crisps and a bottle of Coca-Cola is a meal?
Oh, we had a
60% of the UK population think that is a meal.
We interviewed a doctor who came, I forget where he came from, to the US, and he went and bought a burger and a drink, and he was handed a cup, and he said, well, where's the drink? And they said, you can have as much as you like. So he returned the burger and just filled up with the drink because it cost him nothing, basically, but then said, no nutritional value at all.
One thing that you talk about education, it's funny, we are doing this with kids in the Houston Food Bank. I think every school should include nutrition. It's probably the most important matter.
For boys and girls, might I say. I mean, it's...
Yeah. It's the most important matter that we need to learn. One thing that people don't know, there's millions of people in the United States that die wealthy people that die in hospitals basically of hunger, malnutrition, and they have all the money in the world and they die. I mean, their bodies are starving. They are full of carbs, but they don't have the nutrients they have. And I've seen many cases, close cases, people that live by themselves, they eat very unhealthy life. And it's funny, they say, no, it's more expensive. Actually, it is not. Right. If you get the right product and you learn to cook, and you do that, you can have a extremely price competitive diet, extremely tasty, because when you just cook food for those people, they love it. So, and they have the resources. So the main challenge is education. I do believe we need to introduce nutrition urgently in every school all over the world.
That's a great...
And our health systems will collapse. I mean, the NHS in the UK now spends 30% of its budget on obesity-related disease.
Right. It's
totally unsustainable.
Thank you, all three of you, for a very interesting and thanks for great questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good.